The champagne glass slipped from Victoria Kane's manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the sterling grand ballroom in a cascade of crystal fragments that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through towering windows. 300 of the city's most powerful executives and socialites turned to stare as two security guards dragged a black woman in a simple navy dress toward the exit, her heels scraping against the polished marble, while whispers of approval rippled through the crowd like poison through expensive perfume. Finally, someone's doing something about the uninvited guests, a silver-haired businessman muttered to his wife, who nodded approvingly while adjusting her diamond necklace. Maya Thompson, though no one in that room knew her name, kept her head high as they manhandled her past tables adorned with white orchids and gold place settings, past the silent auction display where items worth more than most people's annual salaries glittered under crystal chandeliers. "I told you she didn't belong here," Victoria hissed to her companion, her ice-blue eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The way she was asking questions about company operations, taking mental notes of everything, probably some kind of corporate spy or journalist trying to infiltrate our circle. Thank God I spotted her before she could cause any real damage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as the guards escorted Maya through the ballroom, designer gowns rustling with disapproval, expensive suits turning away in manufactured disgust. Not one person, not a single leader among these titans of industry, raised their voice in protest as they watched a woman being humiliated in broad daylight for the crime of existing in their sacred space. But Maya wasn't just anyone. As the ballroom doors slammed shut behind her with the finality of a coffin lid, she stood alone in the hotel's opulent lobby, touching the small gold locket at her throat, her grandmother's gift that contained a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. The same grandmother who had whispered in her ear as a child, "Baby girl, dignity is something they can never take from you unless you hand it over." Maya pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and sent a single text message. "It's done. They showed their true colors. Your turn now." Back in the ballroom, the jazz music resumed its cheerful melody as guests returned to their conversations about mergers and acquisitions, private jets, and summer homes in the Hamptons. Victoria smoothed her designer dress and checked her reflection in a mirrored column, satisfied that order had been restored to her perfectly curated world. The servers continued circulating with champagne and caviar, the auction paddles began rising for charity items, and the atmosphere returned to its previous state of polished sophistication, until the CEO himself, Ethan Thompson, stepped onto the stage. "Good afternoon, everyone," his voice boomed through the sound system, commanding immediate attention from every corner of the ballroom. "Before I begin my keynote address about leadership and inclusion, I have one simple question." His eyes scanned the crowd, searching every face with growing confusion and concern. "Has anyone seen my wife? Maya, where are you?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of someone's champagne flute hitting the floor. The crystal champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the sterling grand ballroom, its fragments catching the afternoon sunlight that streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting rainbow prisms across Maya Thompson's simple navy dress. "Get this woman out of here immediately," Victoria Kane commanded, her diamond-encrusted fingers pointing at Maya like a weapon, while two security guards flanked her on either side. The party guests, executives in $1,000 suits and socialites dripping in jewelry, turned to stare at the commotion, their laughter mixing with the soft jazz music that seemed to mock the moment. Maya stood perfectly still, her dark skin glowing under the chandelier's warm light, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that Victoria had just called unprofessional and inappropriate for this caliber of event. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the larger security guard said, his grip firm on her arm as whispers rippled through the crowd like poison through champagne. But as they dragged her toward the exit, past tables adorned with white orchids and gold place settings, Maya smiled, because in exactly 15 minutes, her husband Ethan Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries, would take that very stage to deliver the keynote address, and his first words would be, "Has anyone seen my wife?" If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people who should see you, or watched prejudice masquerade as propriety, then this story will remind you that sometimes the most powerful revelations come wrapped in the most humbling moments. Hit subscribe and join the Acts of Depth family, because what happens when the truth finally emerges, Marontas, will leave everyone in that ballroom speechless. Maya had dressed intentionally that morning, choosing her outfit with the same care a general selects battle armor. At 38, with warm brown eyes that held decades of quiet strength and hands that bore no wedding ring, a choice she'd explain later, she had learned to navigate spaces where she didn't quite fit. The navy dress was elegant but understated, purchased from a department store rather than a designer boutique, paired with simple pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. She'd arrived at the Sterling Grand Hotel in a rideshare rather than the black car service the other attendees used, walking through the gold-trimmed lobby where afternoon light danced on marble surfaces like water. The Corporate Excellence Awards ceremony was Thompson Industries' annual celebration, a gathering of the city's most influential business leaders in a ballroom that could have housed a small aircraft. Maya had watched from the registration table as perfectly coiffed women in designer gowns air-kissed each other, their conversations peppered with mentions of private jets and European vacations. The men, mostly white and silver-haired, clustered around high-top tables discussing mergers and acquisitions while servers in crisp white uniforms circulated with appetizers that cost more than many people's weekly groceries. Maya's plan had been simple: attend the event without fanfare, observe how Thompson Industries partners and clients behaved when they thought no executives were watching, and gather intelligence for her husband's upcoming board presentation on company culture. As the head of community outreach for a nonprofit organization, she developed a keen eye for reading rooms and identifying authentic leaders versus those who merely wore the costume of leadership. Ethan had suggested she come as his guest, but Maya had insisted on attending anonymously, wanting to see the corporate world's true face without the protective shield of being the CEO's wife. Victoria Kane had spotted her immediately. As the self-appointed social coordinator for the city's elite events, Victoria possessed the predatory instincts of someone who had clawed her way from middle-class origins into the upper echelons through marriage, manipulation, and an encyclopedic knowledge of who belonged where. Her blonde hair was pulled into a chignon so tight it seemed to stretch her already sharp features, and her ice blue eyes missed nothing as they scanned the room for potential threats to the established order. When she noticed Maya chatting with a group of younger executives near the silent auction display, something had clearly triggered her alarm system. "Excuse me," Victoria had said, interrupting Maya's conversation about sustainable business practices with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Victoria Kane, and I coordinate these events. Might I ask who you're here with?" Maya had extended her hand, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory about always meeting hostility with grace. "I'm Maya Thompson. I'm here to learn about the incredible work Thompson Industries is doing in our community." Victoria's handshake was brief and cold, her rings creating small indentations on Maya's palm. "Thompson? I'm not familiar with that name on our guest list. Are you perhaps a +1 who got separated from your date?" The question carried the weight of assumption wrapped in politeness, the suggestion that someone like Maya couldn't possibly belong here on her own merit. The younger executives had shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but uncertain whether to intervene. Maya had felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced as one of only 3 black students in her MBA program, the sensation of being perpetually under a microscope, every word and gesture scrutinized for evidence of belonging or intrusion. The afternoon sun had shifted position, casting longer shadows across the ballroom floor as Maya found herself increasingly isolated despite the crowd of 300 people surrounding her. Victoria's initial interrogation had been just the beginning of what felt like a systematic campaign to expose Maya as an imposter. Like a spider weaving a web, Victoria had begun speaking in hushed tones to other attendees, her manicured finger occasionally pointing in Maya's direction while she whispered behind her champagne flute. Maya retreated to the ladies' lounge, a sanctuary of soft lighting and plush velvet chairs where she could gather herself. The mirror reflected a woman who looked tired despite her attempts to maintain composure, and she touched the small gold locket at her throat, a gift from her late grandmother that contained a photo of her parents on their wedding day. The locket had become her anchor in moments like these, a tangible reminder of the love and dignity that had shaped her, despite the world's attempts to diminish her worth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "How's the event? Can't wait to see you when I arrive. The speech is ready. Thanks for helping me revise it last night." Maya smiled, remembering how they'd sat at their kitchen table until midnight, working together to craft words that would inspire genuine change rather than empty corporate rhetoric. Ethan had built Thompson Industries from a small consulting firm into a billion-dollar corporation, but his greatest strength was his willingness to listen and learn, especially from Maya, whose insights had quietly influenced many of his most successful decisions. When Maya returned to the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. Conversations seemed to halt as she passed, and she noticed several security guards positioned strategically around the room's perimeter. Victoria approached her again, this time flanked by two other women whose expressions ranged from curiosity to outright suspicion. "Maya, dear," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I've been making some inquiries, and I'm afraid there seems to be some confusion about your invitation. Our records show no Maya Thompson on the guest list, and frankly, several people have expressed concerns about security." "Security concerns?" Maya kept her voice level, though her heart rate quickened. "Well, you understand, in today's climate, we have to be careful about people who might be here for alternative purposes. Corporate espionage, media infiltration, that sort of thing. You arrived alone, you are asking very detailed questions about company operations, and honestly..." Victoria paused dramatically, allowing her gaze to travel from Maya's shoes to her hair. "You don't quite fit the profile of our typical attendees." The words hung in the air like smoke, their meaning clear to everyone within earshot. Maya felt the familiar burn of tears threatening, but she had learned long ago not to give such people the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she thought of her grandmother's words, "Baby girl, dignity is something they can never take from you unless you hand it over. Hold your head high and let your light shine, no matter how hard they try to dim it." "I can assure you I'm here legitimately," Maya said, reaching for her phone to show her confirmation email. But Victoria waved dismissively. "I'm sure you believe that, dear, but we simply can't take any chances. Security has been instructed to escort you out. Nothing personal, you understand?" The two guards appeared as if summoned by magic, their black suits and serious expressions creating an imposing presence. Maya noticed that other guests had begun pulling out their phones, some clearly hoping to capture whatever drama was about to unfold. The jazz music continued its cheerful melody, creating a surreal soundtrack to her humiliation. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us quietly," the larger guard said, his hand hovering near her elbow, but not quite touching. "We can do this easy way or the hard way." Maya looked around the room one final time, seeing faces that ranged from uncomfortable to gleeful, but not one person stepped forwards to question what was happening. These were supposed to be leaders, innovators, pillars of the community, yet they stood by silently as injustice played out in front of them in broad daylight. The irony wasn't lost on her that Ethan's speech would focus on corporate responsibility and moral leadership. "I'll walk out myself," Maya said quietly, maintaining her dignity even as her world crumbled around her. "But I want everyone here to remember this moment, because I know I will." As she moved toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble with finality, Maya felt her grandmother's locket bounce gently against her chest with each step. She thought about the photo inside, her parents, both teachers who had instilled in her the belief that education and hard work could overcome any obstacle. They would have been heartbroken to see their daughter treated this way, but they also would have been proud of how she carried herself through it. The ballroom doors closed behind her with a soft thud, cutting off the music and conversation, leaving Maya standing alone in the hotel's opulent lobby, where crystal fixtures cast dancing patterns of light across the walls. The lobby's marble expanse stretched before Maya like a no man's land, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon light that streamed through towering windows. Hotel staff moved with practiced discretion, their eyes carefully avoiding hers as she stood alone near a massive floral arrangement of white lilies and eucalyptus that filled the air with their sweet, heavy scent. Maya pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through her messages, looking for comfort in the mundane task of checking emails. Her reflection in the black screen showed a face that had aged years in the span of 30 minutes. She thought about calling Ethan to warn him about what had happened, but glanced at her watch and realized he would already be en route to the hotel. The irony was almost too much to bear. In less than an hour, the man who loved her unconditionally would stand before the very people who had just humiliated her, delivering a speech about the values that supposedly defined his company. The disconnect between aspiration and reality had never felt more stark or more personal. A memory surfaced from their early dating days, when Ethan had first brought her to a corporate event. She'd been nervous about fitting in, worried that her background, growing up in foster care, putting herself through college with scholarships and student loans, wouldn't measure up to the pedigree expected in his world. He'd squeezed her hand and whispered, "Just be yourself. That's who I fell in love with." But being herself, she was learning, wasn't always enough when others had already decided who she was supposed to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Zara. "How's the fancy party? Taking names and changing minds?" Maya stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could she explain that she'd been thrown out of her own husband's company event? That a room full of supposed leaders had watched her be escorted out without a single voice of dissent? The shame felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. As Maya stood there wrestling with her emotions, she noticed a young woman in a hotel uniform approaching with a warm smile. The name tag read Isabella, and her face held genuine concern as she addressed Maya with the kind of respect that had been absent from the ballroom. "Excuse me, ma'am, is everything all right? You look like you might need to sit down. Can I get you some water or perhaps call someone for you?" The simple kindness in Isabella's voice nearly broke Maya's composure. Here was a stranger showing more compassion than an entire room of people who prided themselves on their sophistication and moral leadership. Maya managed a weak smile, touching her grandmother's locket for strength. "Thank you, that's very kind. I'm just waiting for my husband. He should be here soon." Isabella nodded and gestured toward a quiet seating area near the windows. "You're welcome to wait over there if you'd like some privacy. Those chairs are much more comfortable, and the view of the garden is lovely." As Maya settled into one of the plush armchairs, she found herself thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. She'd met Ethan 5 years ago at a nonprofit fundraiser where she'd been representing the literacy organization she worked for. He'd been immediately drawn to her passion and intelligence, admitting later that most of the women in his social circle seemed more interested in his bank account than his ideas. Their courtship had been a revelation for both of them. He'd introduced her to museums and restaurants she'd only read about, while she'd shown him parts of the city he'd never explored, community centers and local businesses that formed the backbone of neighborhoods he'd driven through, but never truly seen. Their wedding had been a small affair by billionaire standards, held in the botanical garden where they'd had their first official date. Maya had insisted on inviting her former foster families and the teachers who had believed in her when no one else did. Ethan's family had attended, but their discomfort had been palpable, their forced smiles unable to mask their disappointment that their golden boy had chosen someone so far outside their carefully curated social circle. The sound of expensive shoes clicking across marble drew Maya's attention back to the present. Through the hotel's glass doors, she could see Ethan's familiar silhouette as he approached, his confident stride faltering slightly when he spotted her sitting alone in the lobby instead of upstairs at the event. His face broke into a concerned frown as he pushed through the doors, his eyes immediately scanning her expression for clues about what had happened. "Maya, what are you doing down here? I thought you'd be networking with the foundation board members we discussed." He sat down beside her, his hand automatically reaching for hers, the simple gesture providing an anchor in the storm of her emotions. Maya looked into his eyes, seeing the man who had chosen her again and again, despite the pressure from his world to choose someone more appropriate. How could she tell him that his own business partners had just decided she wasn't worthy to breathe the same air as them? Ethan's eyes searched Maya's face, reading the telltale signs of distress that he'd learned to recognize over their 5 years together. The afternoon light filtering through the lobby windows caught the silver threads in his dark hair, evidence of the stress that came with running a billion-dollar company, but his attention was completely focused on his wife. Maya took a deep breath, her grandmother's locket catching the light as it rose and fell with the movement, and began to recount the events of the past hour. They threw me out, Ethan. Victoria Kane and her security guards physically escorted me from the ballroom because they decided I didn't belong there. Her voice remained steady, but he could see the pain flickering behind her composed exterior. Ethan's jaw tightened, his businessman's poker face cracking to reveal genuine anger. They what? Maya, that's impossible. You're on the guest list. You're my wife, for God's sake. No, I'm not on the guest list, Maya interrupted gently. Remember? I wanted to attend anonymously, to see how your partners and clients really behave when they think no executives are watching. Well, now I know. The full implications of what she was saying hit Ethan like a physical blow. His company's annual celebration, an event designed to showcase their values and culture, had just become the scene of his wife's public humiliation. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that his keynote speech, which they'd crafted together the night before, was titled Leadership Through Inclusion, Building Bridges, Not Walls. Tell me everything, Ethan said, his voice carrying the same intensity he brought to crucial business negotiations. As Maya recounted Victoria's assumptions, the whispered conversations, and the cold indifference of the other guests, his anger transformed into something more dangerous, a calculated fury that made his eyes flash like steel. Isabella, the hotel employee who had shown Maya such kindness, approached with a tray of water and tea. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought you might want some refreshment. And sir, if I may say so, your wife handled herself with incredible grace during a very difficult situation. Ethan looked up at Isabella with surprise. You witnessed what happened? I was working the reception desk when the incident occurred. Ma'am, I've worked in hospitality for 10 years, and I've never seen anyone maintain their dignity under such circumstances. You should be very proud. As Isabella retreated, Ethan turned back to Maya, his decision crystallizing. You're coming back up there with me. We're walking into that ballroom together, and I'm going to introduce you to every single person who stood by and watched this happen. Maya shook her head, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Ethan, I just want to go home. I don't need their apologies or their guilt. I learned what I needed to know about the people you're doing business with. But I need them to learn something too, Ethan replied, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire. They need to understand that their prejudice has consequences. Maya, you're not just my wife. You're the smartest person I know. You've got an MBA from Wharton. You've turned around 3 nonprofit organizations, and you've influenced more of my business decisions than anyone realizes. The fact that they couldn't see any of that because of their narrow-minded assumptions tells me everything I need to know about their character. Through the windows, they could see late arrivals still entering the hotel, dressed in their finest attire, blissfully unaware of the reckoning that awaited them upstairs. Maya thought about all the young professionals of color who work for Thompson Industries, wondering how many of them had faced similar treatment at company events, their experiences dismissed or overlooked because speaking up might jeopardize their careers. If we do this, Maya said slowly, it can't be about revenge. It has to be about real change. These people need to understand that their actions have consequences, but more importantly, they need to commit to doing better. Ethan nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. What did you have in mind? Maya's mind was already working, formulating a plan that would address not just this specific incident, but the larger cultural issues it represented. Your speech, we need to change it. Instead of talking about theoretical inclusion, we need to address what just happened. Make it real, make it personal, make it impossible for them to ignore. As they stood together in the lobby, Maya felt her grandmother's strength flowing through her, the same courage that had carried 3 generations of women through challenges that would have broken lesser spirits. The locket at her throat seemed to pulse with warmth, a reminder that she came from a long line of women who had refused to be diminished by others' limited expectations. Are you ready to go change some minds? Ethan asked, offering his arm. Maya straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of the moment settling around her like armor. Let's go show them what leadership really looks like. Together, they walked toward the elevators that would carry them back to the ballroom, where 300 of the city's most influential leaders were about to receive an education in humility, accountability, and the true meaning of corporate responsibility. The elevator's brass doors opened onto the sterling grand ballroom with a soft chime that seemed to announce their arrival to the universe itself. Maya stepped out first, her navy dress now looking regal rather than simple, her natural hair catching the light from the chandeliers like a crown. Ethan followed, his presence commanding immediate attention as executives and socialites turned to greet the man they'd been waiting to hear speak. The irony of their enthusiasm wasn't lost on Maya. These same people would have stepped over her bleeding body an hour ago, but now they smiled and nodded because she stood beside their golden boy. Victoria Kane spotted them immediately, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and horror in the span of 3 seconds. She approached with the desperate energy of someone trying to control a situation that had already spiraled beyond her influence, her designer heels clicking against the marble like a countdown to judgment. "Ethan, darling," Victoria exclaimed, air kissing his cheeks while carefully avoiding eye contact with Maya. "We've been so looking forward to your speech. I trust everything is in order. I know how important these events are for setting the tone for the company's future." "Actually, Victoria, I wanted to thank you personally," Ethan replied, his voice carrying the kind of dangerous politeness that made seasoned negotiators nervous. "You've given me exactly the material I need for my speech today." Maya was just telling me about her extraordinary experience as an anonymous guest at our event. The color drained from Victoria's face as she finally looked directly at Maya, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. The realization hit her like a tsunami. This was Ethan Thompson's wife, the woman she'd had thrown out of the party like a common criminal. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, resembling a fish gasping for water on dry land. There must have been some misunderstanding," Victoria stammered. "If I had known, she wasn't on the list, and with security concerns these days." "Oh, there was definitely a misunderstanding," Maya said quietly, her voice cutting through Victoria's excuses with surgical precision. "You misunderstood what leadership looks like. You misunderstood what belonging means, and you definitely misunderstood who belongs in this room." Ethan checked his watch and nodded toward the stage where a small podium waited, bathed in spotlights that would soon illuminate the most important speech of his career. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "I'd like to begin my presentation a few minutes early. Please take your seats." The crowd moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to following the subtle commands of wealth and power. Maya and Ethan walked to the front of the room together, her hand resting lightly on his arm, their united front impossible to miss. As they passed through the crowd, Maya caught glimpses of recognition dawning on various faces, executives who were beginning to remember seeing her earlier, party guests who were starting to piece together the timeline of events. Ethan took the podium while Maya stood beside him, her presence transforming the entire dynamic of the room. The prepared speech lay forgotten in his jacket pocket as he looked out at the sea of expectant faces, many of whom had no idea they were about to become participants in a master class on accountability. "Good afternoon," Ethan began, his voice clear and strong. "I came here today to talk about leadership and inclusion, about the values that define Thompson Industries and our commitment to creating opportunities for everyone. But instead, I'm going to tell you about what happened to my wife an hour ago in this very room." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft clink of someone setting down a champagne glass with unsteady hands. Maya watched as understanding spread through the crowd like ripples across a pond, faces changing from confusion to embarrassment to something approaching shame. Maya Thompson, my partner in life and my most trusted advisor, was thrown out of this party by security because someone decided she didn't look like she belonged here. She was questioned, dismissed, and ultimately humiliated by people who claimed to be leaders in our community. The woman who helped me write the speech I was planning to give about inclusion was excluded from her own husband's company event. Victoria Kane had found a chair and sunk into it, her face buried in her hands as the full magnitude of her error became clear. Around the room, other guests were pulling out their phones, some frantically deleting photos or videos they'd taken of Maya's ejection. Others beginning to film Ethan's speech with the recognition that they were witnessing something historic. "I want everyone in this room to understand something," Ethan continued, his voice gaining power with each word. "Maya has an MBA from Wharton. She's turned around 3 major nonprofit organizations, and she's influenced more of my business decisions than anyone in this room. The fact that you couldn't see any of that you reduced her to stereotypes and assumptions, tells me we have a lot more work to do than I thought."